Here's your script. By the time the first Russian tank crew understood what was happening, the road near Pokrovsk was already turning into a furnace. What looked like a routine armored push became a rolling execution. Lead vehicles stalled. Rear vehicles trapped. Turrets swung toward empty tree lines while small Ukrainian FPV drones came in low, fast, and one after another. And the most brutal part was this: the column had not been defeated by a bigger armored force. It had been found, fixed, isolated, and dismantled by eyes in the sky that cost less than a single tank's optics package. The objective was simple enough on paper. Push armor forward near Pokrovsk, test the Ukrainian line, force a reaction, and if resistance looked weak, widen the breach before reserves could move. Pokrovsk was not just another point on the map. It sat inside a wider battle space of roads, spoil heaps, shattered villages, tree belts, drainage cuts, and open agricultural ground that made every movement visible to someone. The side that could move through that terrain without being detected could shape the next phase of the battle. The side that could not was forced to pay for every kilometer. The Russian column was likely built for speed and intimidation. Tanks in front to absorb contact. Infantry fighting vehicles behind them to carry assault groups. Possibly an engineering vehicle somewhere in the formation. Electronic warfare support not far away. Fuel and ammunition farther to the rear. The kind of force designed to punch, not linger. What it was supposed to do was obvious. Advance hard. Get close. Force Ukrainian defenders to reveal firing points. Break the tactical rhythm of the front line. Create the impression of momentum. But what was supposed to happen and what actually happens near Pokrovsk are often two different things. Because terrain there does not forgive armored arrogance. Long fields create sight lines. Thin tree belts conceal drones. Damaged roads compress formations. Craters, ditches, and abandoned structures break spacing. A column that enters fast does not always leave fast. And somewhere above that ground, almost certainly before the tanks themselves saw danger, Ukrainian FPV teams had already seen the column. A Russian tank column is dangerous even before it fires. Not because every tank is invincible. They are not. Not because armor guarantees survival. It does not. But because a moving armored force concentrates shock. Steel. Momentum. Guns. Optics. Radios. Crews trained to press through confusion rather than stop inside it. A tank column threatens more than the point it is aimed at. It threatens time. It threatens decision-making. It threatens nerves. Once armor gets close enough, defenders have to choose quickly, hold fire and risk being overrun, or engage too early and expose themselves. That is why columns still matter. Even in a drone war, armor can still create panic, force redeployment, and open gaps for follow-on infantry. If it reaches the right piece of ground intact, it can still crush positions that lighter forces cannot. And near Pokrovsk, the psychological weight of armored movement matters as much as the metal itself. Dust rising in the distance. Engines carrying across flat ground. Turrets moving over the horizon. A line of vehicles advancing with the assumption that something ahead will break first. That was the image this column projected. But the image was false. Because the real fight was no longer about whether the tanks could survive contact with another armored force. The real fight was whether they could survive being seen. The column had armor, firepower, and probably electronic protection. But it was still bound by roads, by spacing, by terrain, by command delay, by crew visibility, by the need to keep moving in a coherent line. And every one of those requirements created a pattern. FPV drone warfare punishes patterns. A tank can survive fragments. It can sometimes survive a glancing anti-armor hit. It can sometimes even keep moving after damage that would destroy a lighter vehicle. But once a column is detected early enough, the fight changes from armor versus armor into geometry versus time. The Ukrainians did not need to destroy every tank with the first strike. They only needed to change the shape of the column. Disable the lead vehicle. Damage the rear. Force the middle to bunch up. Separate the escort from the main body. Make the crews stop looking outward and start looking upward. Once that happens, armor stops behaving like a spear and starts behaving like traffic. And traffic on a battlefield is a death sentence. What the Russian crews likely counted on was mass, speed, and suppression. What they may not have realized was that Ukrainian FPV teams near Pokrovsk had turned battlefield observation into a kill chain measured in minutes, not hours. The column was not entering empty ground. It was entering a system. The battle probably did not begin with a blast. It began with a sighting. A Ukrainian observation drone, or a network of forward teams working with multiple drone feeds, catches movement near a route that armor would naturally use. The signal goes out fast. Vehicle count. Direction of travel. Formation spacing. Speed. Whether the column has infantry screens. Whether it is hugging cover or crossing open ground. This is the first moment that decides everything. Because once the Ukrainians know what they are looking at, they do not have to rush. They can study the formation. Identify the most valuable target. Decide whether the first strike should hit a tank, a command vehicle, an engineering asset, or the electronic warfare support that is supposed to protect the whole push. The Russians, meanwhile, are still in the old rhythm of armored movement. Crews scanning front arcs. Commanders focused on direction and interval. Guns prepared for contact ahead, not impact from above and to the side. That mismatch matters. Tanks are built to fight other visible threats. A drone war punishes what a crew cannot track fast enough. A small FPV drone does not arrive like artillery. It does not announce itself like a missile launch. It appears at the edge of awareness. A buzz. A flash of movement. Then impact. But the real danger was still ahead. Because once Ukrainian teams confirmed the route, they were no longer reacting. They were preparing a layered ambush. The first drone attacks likely had a very specific purpose. Not maximum destruction. Maximum disruption. The lead element of a column is always valuable. Hit the front, and everything behind it has to slow, detour, or stop. Hit the rear, and the whole formation loses freedom of movement. Hit both, and the road becomes a trap. So the first drones would have gone for what could freeze momentum fastest. Tracks engine decks. Exposed weak points around the top of the hull or turret. Maybe the command tank if it was identifiable. Maybe a support vehicle that the rest of the column needed more than the crews realized. One successful strike at the front can do more than destroy one vehicle. It can force every following crew into hesitation. The second successful strike compounds it. Smoke begins to build. Dust mixes with burnt fuel. Radios fill with short, urgent calls. Drivers brake. Vehicles close spacing. The column loses its shape. And once it loses shape, it loses initiative. Now the terrain starts helping the attackers. A narrow farm road. A tree line on one side. Soft ground on the other. Craters from earlier strikes. Vehicles reluctant to leave the road because mines are possible. Turrets rotating, but never fast enough to track a small incoming drone cutting low over broken ground. What looked like a breakthrough lane becomes a funnel. Some crews fire machine guns wildly. Others button up tighter, reducing visibility even more. Someone orders smoke. Smoke helps, but only partly. It hides the column from distant eyes, not from nearby drones already diving in. And smoke creates its own panic. Inside armored vehicles, crews feel blind before they are dead. By then, the situation had already changed. This was no longer a Russian advance under pressure. It was a Russian traffic jam under attack. Once the column stalls, every advantage it brought to the battlefield begins to rot. A moving tank is difficult. A stalled tank is a target. FPV drones thrive in that moment because they are not trying to win one duel. They are trying to exploit overload. Each new strike forces a new decision. Dismount or stay inside. reverse or push forward, scatter or hold formation, fire at drones or preserve ammunition for a threat that may still be ahead. Every option costs time, and time is the one resource a trapped column no longer owns. The Ukrainians would likely have shifted aim from simple mobility kills to system kills. Optics, engine compartments, exposed ammunition, supporting infantry vehicles. Anything that strips the column of awareness and mutual protection. Tanks alone are dangerous. Tanks separated from infantry, blinded by stress, and compressed by terrain are vulnerable in a very modern way. This is where the human pressure becomes unbearable. Inside a tank, noise becomes its own weapon. Engine vibration, radio traffic, impacts on armor, the rattle of machine gun fire. Crew members trying to locate threats that do not stay in one place long enough to be engaged properly. The knowledge that something small, cheap, and almost invisible is hunting a vehicle worth millions. Some crews would keep discipline. Others would not. Some vehicles might push off the road to escape the kill zone, only to bog down, expose their flanks, or strike damaged ground. Some infantry might dismount too early and find themselves pinned by fragmentation, small arms, or more drones. Commanders trying to restore order would discover the hardest truth in drone warfare: control collapses faster than armor does. And then another layer opens. Because a stalled or scattered column does not just invite more drones. It invites artillery, mortars, secondary drone observation, and precision follow-up. Once fixed in place, it becomes a map reference. What began as a drone sighting becomes an artillery problem. What began as an armored push becomes a target package. At some point, someone on the Russian side would have understood that the breakthrough was over. No clean penetration. No rapid exploitation. No controlled assault into Ukrainian positions. Just damaged vehicles, interrupted movement, broken spacing, and a road turning into a graveyard of halted steel. But retreating out of a drone kill zone is often harder than entering it. Reverse movement under stress is slow. Turning around large armored vehicles on damaged roads takes time and space. Burning wrecks narrow escape routes. Abandoned vehicles create obstacles. Crews leaving disabled tanks expose themselves to another set of threats entirely. A withdrawal that begins in order can collapse into fragments in minutes. This is the moment when morale matters as much as machinery. Crews do not need to believe they are surrounded to act as if they are. They only need to believe that every halt brings another drone. And that belief spreads fast. What looked like a hard Russian armored thrust now breaks into separate survival decisions. One vehicle attempts to tow another and gets struck. One tank tries to cover the road with suppressive fire, but fires into empty concealment because the real attackers are not where the shells land. A surviving vehicle accelerates through smoke, escapes for a few hundred meters, then takes a hit on the engine deck. Another simply stops after a near miss, its crew no longer willing to push blind into ground already claimed by invisible eyes. The column dissolves not all at once, but piece by piece. That is how modern armored failure often looks. Not one giant explosion, but a chain reaction of lost movement, lost awareness, lost control, and finally lost purpose. By the end, the battlefield outcome would have been measured in more than destroyed vehicles. There would have been tanks abandoned or burning on the road. Infantry fighting vehicles hit while trying to maneuver around the wreckage. Support assets lost or cut off. Assault momentum erased. A local armored effort turned into another warning to every crew still moving anywhere near Pokrovsk. And the deeper loss was doctrinal. Because the column did not fail simply because Ukrainian drones were brave or numerous. It failed because the old promise of armored mass no longer guarantees breakthrough when the enemy sees first, coordinates faster, and attacks the formation instead of the individual vehicle. This is the lesson modern battle keeps repeating. Armor is not obsolete. But unsupported armor, predictable armor, road-bound armor, and armor that assumes it can bully its way through a watched battlespace is no longer a spear. It is a signature. Near Pokrovsk, that signature was detected, shaped, and punished. The Russian column may have expected to terrorize the line, force Ukrainian defenders backward, and prove that steel still decides the ground. Instead, it ran into the logic of this war: cheap sensors, fast strike chains, narrow routes, exposed timing, and a battlefield where being seen is often the beginning of destruction. That is why the title matters. Russian tank column spotted by Ukrainian FPV drones near Pokrovsk. Then this happened. Not because something random happened afterward, but because the moment it was spotted, the outcome had already begun. If you want more battlefield breakdowns told with the full tactical picture, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.